What if everything you do today, from checking the time to seeking justice, comes from a city that vanished thousands of years ago? Genesis 1:1 tells us about the beginning of creation, but human civilization as we know it truly began in one specific place. Most people assume modern society developed gradually across many cultures, but archaeological evidence shows that a single ancient city gave us the fundamental structures we still use every day. In this journey, we will trace three revolutionary discoveries. First, we will see how one city became the birthplace of law, science, and timekeeping. Then, we will uncover why biblical writers both feared and were shaped by this civilization. Finally, we will reveal how Babylon's ideas literally run through your veins, your calendar, and your conception of justice. And once we understand this first layer, the real story begins. The name itself carries weight, Babylon. Even if you know nothing about ancient history, the word resonates with mystery and power. For thousands of years, this name has symbolized both human achievement and moral warning. The actual meaning of Babylon translates to Gateway of God, or Gateway of the Gods. The ancient Akkadian words Babilai literally mean the place where heaven touches earth. This wasn't just poetic language. The people who built Babylon genuinely believed their city served as the connection point between the divine realm and the mortal world. Picture the ancient world around 2000 BC. Most humans lived in small villages. They farmed, raised animals, and rarely traveled more than a day's walk from their birthplace. Cities existed, but they were modest. Then Babylon emerged. This city grew into something unprecedented. Massive walls surrounded it. The Greek historian Herodotus claimed these walls stretched so wide that a four-horse chariot could turn around on top of them. Modern archaeology suggests Herodotus exaggerated, but even the confirmed measurements astound us. The outer walls extended over 10 miles in circumference. Inside these walls, life pulsed with activity unlike anywhere else on Earth. Markets filled with merchants from distant lands. The air carried dozens of languages. Spices from India mixed with copper from Anatolia and timber from Lebanon. But Babylon was never just about trade. The city's true power came from ideas. Scholars worked in temple complexes, studying the stars and developing mathematical systems. Scribes recorded everything on clay tablets. Legal officials administered a justice system more sophisticated than anything that existed before. The Euphrates River flowed directly through the city's heart. This wasn't accidental. Babylonian engineers designed their city around water. They built canals and irrigation systems that turned the surrounding desert into productive farmland. They constructed a bridge across the Euphrates, connecting the two halves of their growing metropolis. This bridge represented more than engineering. It symbolized Babylon's entire philosophy, connection, unification, bringing together what was separate. At the city center stood the Isagila, the great temple of Marduk. This structure dominated the skyline. Adjacent to it rose the famous ziggurat called Atemenenki, which translates to Temple of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth. This tower reached upward in 7 massive stages, each painted a different color. Scholars believe this ziggurat inspired the biblical story of the Tower of Babel found in Genesis 11. The connection between Babylon and biblical narrative runs deep, as we will discover. But here's what makes Babylon truly remarkable. The city existed for nearly 2,000 years as a major center of civilization. Empires rose and fell. Dynasties came and went. Foreign conquerors repeatedly captured the city, yet Babylon endured. Each new ruler recognized the city's special status. Even conquerors who destroyed other cities preserved Babylon. Why? Because Babylon represented something beyond military power. It embodied knowledge, culture, and divine favor. The city attracted the best minds of the ancient world. If you were an astronomer in 500 BC, you wanted to study in Babylon. If you were a mathematician, Babylon had the most advanced techniques. If you were a merchant, Babylon connected you to trade networks spanning from Egypt to India. If you were a priest, Babylon's temples and religious traditions influenced spiritual practices across the entire Near East. Think about your own life for a moment. You check your phone and see the time, 3:47 p.m. You understand time divided into hours and minutes because Babylonian mathematicians decided to use a base 60 number system. You plan to meet a friend at 7:30. Those precise time divisions came from Babylon. You read your horoscope whether you believe in it or not. The zodiac was invented in Babylon. You know the names of the planets. Most derive from Babylonian gods filtered through Greek and Roman translations. When a court sentences a criminal, judges try to make the punishment fit the crime. This principle of proportional justice emerged from Babylonian legal philosophy. When you study geometry and learn about angles measured in degrees, you're using Babylonian mathematics. The 360-degree circle came from Babylon. When astronomers predict eclipses with perfect accuracy, they're using techniques refined over centuries by Babylonian star watchers. Subscribe now to discover how one ancient city shaped literally everything about your daily life. But Babylon wasn't just about practical innovations. The city developed a complex religious and philosophical worldview that influenced three major world religions. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all carry Babylonian influences in their theology, their concepts of cosmic order, and even their visions of the end times. The Book of Revelation depicts Babylon the Great as the ultimate symbol of human pride and corruption. This wasn't random symbolism. Early Christians understood Babylon's overwhelming cultural power. The Jews experienced their most transformative historical period in Babylon. After Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BC and exiled the Jewish population to Babylon, something unexpected happened. Instead of disappearing as a people, the Jews preserved and codified their identity. They developed new religious institutions. They began compiling and editing their sacred texts into what would become the Hebrew Bible. Babylon, the supposed enemy, became the crucible where Judaism was refined and strengthened. But what actually happened in this city? How did Babylon gain such overwhelming influence? The story begins not with Babylon itself, but with the land that surrounded it. Mesopotamia, the Greeks called it, the land between two rivers. Here, human civilization first learned to write, build cities, and organize complex societies. The story of Babylon cannot be separated from the story of Mesopotamia itself. And once we understand this first layer, the real story begins. Chapter 2. The land where civilization began. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers created Mesopotamia. These two massive waterways flow from the mountains of modern Turkey down through Syria and Iraq before joining and emptying into the Persian Gulf. The land between these rivers offered extraordinary potential. Rich soil deposited by annual floods could produce abundant crops. But this potential came with deadly risks. Mesopotamian floods were unpredictable and violent. Unlike the Nile in Egypt, which flooded reliably every year at the same time, the Tigris and Euphrates could overflow their banks at any moment. Sometimes floods destroyed entire villages in a single night. Other years, the rivers barely rose at all, leading to drought and famine. This unpredictability shaped Mesopotamian culture. The people who lived here learned to plan, to build defensive structures, and to develop complex irrigation systems that could store water during floods and distribute it during dry periods. The first people to truly master this environment were the Sumerians. Nobody knows exactly where the Sumerians came from originally. Their language connects to no other known language family. They appear in the archaeological record around 4500 BC, settling in the southern part of Mesopotamia. Within a few centuries, they accomplished something revolutionary. They built cities. This might not sound impressive to modern ears. We're surrounded by cities. But in 4000 BC, the entire concept of a city was new. Most humans lived in villages of maybe a few hundred people. Everyone knew everyone. Social organization remained simple. But the Sumerians built Uruk, a city that eventually housed over 50,000 people. Imagine the organizational challenges. How do you feed 50,000 people? How do you maintain order? How do you manage water distribution, waste disposal, and defense? The Sumerians developed solutions. They created the first formal governments with appointed officials responsible for specific tasks. They built massive temple complexes that served as administrative centers, not just religious sites. Priests functioned as managers, overseeing agricultural production and trade. They developed the first written language, cuneiform, pressing wedge-shaped marks into clay tablets. Initially, this writing served purely practical purposes, recording grain supplies, tracking workers, documenting transactions. But writing changed everything. Once you can record information externally, outside human memory, knowledge accumulates across generations. A scribe in 2500 BC could read texts written by scribes who died centuries earlier. Ideas could spread from city to city through written tablets rather than through oral tradition alone. Laws could be written down and standardized. Religious beliefs could be codified. History itself became possible. Comment below. Did you know written language was invented for accounting, not poetry? The Sumerians built multiple city-states across southern Mesopotamia. Each city functioned independently, ruled by its own king and protected by its own patron deity. Uruk worshipped Inanna, goddess of love and war. Ur honored Nana, the moon god. Nippur served as a religious center dedicated to Enlil, god of wind and storms. These cities competed economically and militarily, but they also shared a common culture, language, and religious worldview. Around 233-4 BC, everything changed. A man named Sargon rose to power in the city of Akkad. Sargon wasn't Sumerian. He spoke Akkadian, a Semitic language related to Hebrew and Arabic. The Akkadians had lived alongside the Sumerians for centuries, but as a secondary population. Sargon changed this dynamic permanently. Sargon's origins remain mysterious. Later legends claimed he was abandoned as a baby, placed in a basket in the river, and found by a gardener who raised him. This story sounds remarkably similar to the biblical account of Moses. Whether true or legendary, Sargon emerged from obscurity to become cupbearer to the king of Kish. Then he seized power. How exactly this happened, we don't know. But once in control, Sargon proved to be a military genius and an ambitious empire builder. Sargon conquered the Sumerian city-states one by one. He pushed north into Syria and Anatolia. He claimed to have washed his weapons in the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean Sea, meaning he controlled territory from one end of the Fertile Crescent to the other. This was the first true empire in human history. Previous kings had ruled single cities or small regions. Sargon ruled an empire that required complex administration, supply lines, and communication networks. Sargon made Akkadian the official language of his empire. Sumerian remained important for religious and scholarly purposes, but Akkadian became the language of government and commerce. This linguistic shift had lasting consequences. For the next 2,000 years, Akkadian served as the international language of the Near East. When Egyptian pharaohs corresponded with kings in Canaan, they wrote in Akkadian. When Hittite emperors negotiated with Babylonian rulers, they used Akkadian, but empires based on military conquest alone rarely last. Sargon's dynasty ruled for about 150 years before collapsing. The reasons remain unclear. Climate change may have played a role. Rebellions certainly occurred. Invading tribes called the Gutians swept through Mesopotamia, destroying centralized authority. For about a century, chaos reigned. Then the Sumerians experienced a renaissance. The city of Ur established dominance, creating what historians call the Third Dynasty of Ur, or Ur III period. This dynasty rebuilt temples, codified laws, and standardized administration. They created one of the most bureaucratic states in ancient history. Clay tablets from this period record everything: worker assignments, rations distributed, animals counted. Some historians joke that Ur III invented bureaucratic paperwork, but this Sumerian revival didn't last either. Around 2000 BC, the Ur III dynasty collapsed under pressure from invading Amorites. These Amorites were Semitic-speaking nomads from the Syrian desert. Rather than destroying Mesopotamian civilization, they adopted it. Amorite chiefs became kings of Mesopotamian cities. They learned Akkadian, worshipped Mesopotamian gods, and employed Sumerian scribes. One of these Amorite-ruled cities was Babylon. It had existed for centuries as a minor settlement, politically insignificant compared to great cities like Ur, Uruk, and Nippur. But under Amorite rule, Babylon's fortunes began to change. The city occupied a strategic location at a point where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers flowed close together. This made Babylon a natural center for trade and communication. The Amorite dynasty in Babylon produced a series of capable but unremarkable kings. They expanded their territory slowly. They built alliances through marriage and diplomacy. They waited patiently for their moment. That moment came with the sixth king of the dynasty. His name was Hammurabi. And what comes next will shock you, because this one ruler transformed Babylon from a minor city into the center of the civilized world. Chapter 3: The Rise of Kings and Empires. Hammurabi took the throne around 1792 BC. At that moment, nobody could have predicted what would follow. Babylon controlled a small territory, maybe 50 miles in each direction. Powerful kingdoms surrounded it. To the north lay Assyria, a militaristic state with a fearsome army. To the south, the city of Larsa dominated. To the east, the kingdom of Elam posed a constant threat. Hammurabi ruled a minor power in a dangerous neighborhood. For the first 30 years of his reign, Hammurabi focused inward. He didn't launch wars of conquest. He didn't seek glory through military campaigns. Instead, he built infrastructure. He dug canals. He strengthened city walls. He improved agricultural productivity. He reformed the administrative system. He appointed competent officials. He standardized weights and measures to facilitate trade. These actions seem boring compared to military conquest, but they proved far more important. Hammurabi understood a fundamental truth that many rulers missed. Real power doesn't come primarily from armies. It comes from economic prosperity, efficient administration, and popular support. A well-managed state with productive agriculture and thriving trade could afford better armies than a poorly managed state that focused exclusively on military spending. So Hammurabi built the foundation first. He also proved to be a masterful diplomat. Ancient Near Eastern politics operated through a complex system of alliances, marriages, and tributary relationships. Kings referred to each other as brother when they were equals, or as father and son when one was clearly superior. Hammurabi maintained correspondence with numerous rulers. Clay tablets preserve some of these letters, showing Hammurabi's careful diplomatic maneuvering. Like and subscribe if you're learning how ancient politics actually worked. In one letter, Hammurabi writes to another king about a minor border dispute. He doesn't threaten war. Instead, he suggests arbitration, appeals to their friendship, and offers economic incentives for cooperation. In another letter, he responds to a request for troops by explaining why he needs his soldiers at home, but offers to send supplies instead. Hammurabi knew when to fight, when to negotiate, and when to simply wait. But Hammurabi also knew when to strike. Around year 30 of his reign, the geopolitical situation shifted. A coalition formed against Larsa, the powerful kingdom to Babylon's south. Hammurabi saw his opportunity. He joined the coalition and helped defeat Larsa. But instead of allowing Larsa to be divided among the coalition members, Hammurabi suddenly turned on his allies. In a series of brilliant campaigns, he defeated them one by one. This wasn't random betrayal. Hammurabi had carefully analyzed the strategic situation. He recognized that the coalition itself would become a threat to Babylon once Larsa fell. By striking first, while his supposed allies were dispersed and unprepared, Hammurabi gained the advantage. Within a few years, he had conquered Larsa, Eshnunna, Mari, and Assyria. The small kingdom of Babylon had become an empire controlling most of Mesopotamia. But conquest alone wouldn't secure Hammurabi's empire. He needed legitimacy. He needed his diverse subjects to accept Babylonian rule. Here, Hammurabi made a brilliant cultural move. He elevated Babylon's patron deity, Marduk, to supreme status among the gods. Previously, Marduk had been a relatively minor deity. The traditional king of the gods was Enlil, worshipped at Nippur. But Hammurabi's scribes and priests began promoting Marduk. They composed new religious texts presenting Marduk as the champion of the gods. the deity who saved the divine realm from chaos. They rewrote creation myths to place Marduk at the center. They built massive temples to Marduk in Babylon. They established religious festivals that required representatives from all conquered cities to travel to Babylon and participate in ceremonies honoring Marduk. This wasn't just politics, it was sophisticated propaganda. If Marduk was the supreme god, and Marduk had chosen Babylon as his earthly home, then Babylon's dominance was divinely ordained. Kings ruling Babylon weren't mere conquerors, they were Marduk's chosen representatives on earth. This ideology would survive for over 1,000 years, outlasting Hammurabi's dynasty itself. Hammurabi also revolutionized administration. Previous Mesopotamian empires had allowed conquered cities to maintain local rulers, requiring only tribute and military support. Hammurabi created a more centralized system. He appointed governors who answered directly to him. He required regular reports. He sent royal inspectors to verify that his commands were being followed. He maintained a rapid communication system using messengers who could relay information across the empire in days rather than weeks. Clay tablets preserve many of Hammurabi's administrative letters. They reveal a ruler obsessed with details. In one letter, Hammurabi orders an investigation into why a canal wasn't dug properly. In another, he demands to know why a widow hasn't received justice in a local dispute. In a third, he personally reviews the case of a slave seeking freedom. These weren't matters requiring a king's attention in theory, but Hammurabi understood that justice and good governance at all levels secured his power more reliably than military force alone. This brings us to Hammurabi's most famous achievement, the one that made his name immortal. Around year 38 of his reign, Hammurabi compiled and published his Code of Laws. This wasn't the first law code in history. Earlier Mesopotamian rulers had issued laws, but Hammurabi's code was more comprehensive, more widely published, and more influential than any previous legal text. Share this video with anyone interested in the foundations of justice. Hammurabi had his laws inscribed on massive stone pillars called stelae. These were placed in cities throughout his empire, displayed publicly where anyone could read them. The most famous example stands over 7 feet tall. At the top, a carved image shows Hammurabi standing before Shamash, the sun god and god of justice. Shamash hands Hammurabi the laws, indicating their divine origin. Below this image, 282 laws are inscribed in neat columns of cuneiform text. But what made these laws revolutionary? Why do we still talk about the Code of Hammurabi over 3,700 years after it was written? The answer reveals something profound about civilization itself. And once we understand what Hammurabi actually did, we'll see why every legal system in the modern world traces its philosophical roots back to this ancient Babylonian king. But that story requires its own chapter. Chapter 4. Hammurabi's transformation before Hammurabi. Justice in Mesopotamia was local, personal, and often arbitrary. If someone wronged you, you sought compensation from the offender or their family. If they refused, you might resort to violence. Feuds between families could last generations. Powerful people could oppress the weak with little consequence. Local officials administered justice based on custom and personal judgment, which varied wildly from one city to another. Hammurabi changed this system fundamentally. His code didn't just list penalties for crimes. It established principles that transformed the concept of justice itself. The most important principle was standardization. The same crime received the same punishment regardless of where in the empire it occurred. A theft in Babylon was punished identically to a theft in Larsa. This sounds obvious to us, but it was revolutionary in 1750 BC. The second principle was proportionality. Punishments should match the severity of the crime. This is where the famous eye for an eye concept emerges. Exodus 21:24 later codifies this same principle in biblical law. Eye, for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. But Hammurabi wrote this principle into law centuries before the Torah was compiled. If you caused someone to lose an eye, you lost your own eye. If you killed someone's slave, you paid compensation equal to that slave's value. Modern readers often view eye for an eye as harsh and primitive, but in its historical context, this represented progress. The principle actually limited revenge. Previously, if you took someone's eye, their entire family might attack your entire family, leading to escalating violence. Hammurabi's code said no. Revenge must be proportional, only an eye for an eye, nothing more. The third principle was that punishment should be public and predictable. By publishing his laws throughout the empire, Hammurabi ensured that everyone, in theory, knew the consequences of their actions. You couldn't claim ignorance. You couldn't rely on a sympathetic local official to let you escape consequences. The law applied equally to everyone. Well, almost. Here's where it gets controversial. Hammurabi's code wasn't actually equal. It explicitly distinguished between social classes. If a nobleman struck another nobleman, he paid a fine. If a nobleman struck a commoner, he paid a smaller fine. If a nobleman struck a slave, he paid only a tiny penalty. Conversely, if a commoner struck a nobleman, the commoner might be physically punished. The concept of equality before the law didn't exist yet. Women also occupied a complex position in Hammurabi's code. On one hand, the code protected women's property rights in ways that were advanced for the ancient world. A widow kept her dowry, a divorced woman received financial support, fathers couldn't arbitrarily sell their daughters, but women remained under male authority, either their fathers or their husbands. A woman accused of adultery might be thrown into the river. If she drowned, she was guilty. If she survived, she was innocent. Men faced no such trial for adultery. Comment your thoughts. How do ancient laws compare to modern justice systems? Yet, despite these inequalities, Hammurabi's code represented enormous progress. It protected the weak from arbitrary abuse by the powerful. Several laws specifically defend widows, orphans, and the poor. One law states that if a builder constructs a house that collapses and kills the owner's son, the builder's son shall be put to death. This sounds harsh, but it meant the wealthy couldn't escape consequences by paying fines while poor people suffered corporal punishment. Everyone at every social level faced real consequences. The code covered an enormous range of situations. It addressed property disputes, inheritance rights, business contracts, marriage and divorce, adoptions, slavery, false accusations, theft, assault, and professional liability. A surgeon who caused a patient's death faced penalties. A boatman who sank someone's cargo had to provide compensation. A wine seller who watered down wine could be drowned. These detailed provisions showed that Hammurabi intended his code to be actually used, not just theoretical. The code also reveals daily life in Babylon. We learn that wage rates were standardized. A field laborer earned a specific amount per day. We learn about rental costs for boats and animals. We learn that temples operated as lending institutions, charging interest rates capped by law. We learn that Babylon had professional scribes, doctors, barbers, builders, boatmen, shepherds, and merchants, each with specific legal obligations and rights. Religious obligations were also codified. One law required that priestesses of certain orders remain celibate. Another regulated temple prostitution, a practice that shocks modern readers but was integrated into ancient Near Eastern religion. Temples weren't just places of worship, they were economic centers, social service providers, and legal institutions. Priests kept records, witnessed contracts, and provided asylum for people fleeing violence. Hammurabi's code influenced legal thinking for centuries. When the Assyrians conquered Babylon centuries later, they adopted modified versions of Hammurabi's laws. When the Persians ruled Mesopotamia, they studied Babylonian legal traditions. When Hebrew scribes compiled the legal sections of the Torah, they worked in a world shaped by Babylonian legal concepts. The Code of Hammurabi didn't directly create modern law, but it established principles that flowed through history: written law, standardized punishment, proportional justice, and legal protection for the vulnerable. But law was only one aspect of Babylonian civilization. Religion permeated every aspect of life. The gods weren't distant philosophical concepts. They were active participants in daily affairs. They demanded worship, received offerings, and intervened in human events. Understanding Babylonian religion is essential to understanding why this civilization influenced biblical writers so profoundly. The gods of Babylon shaped not only Mesopotamian spirituality, but also the religious imagination of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And when we explore the Babylonian pantheon, we discover something fascinating. These gods weren't random mythological figures, they represented a sophisticated understanding of cosmic order, natural forces, and the relationship between divine and human realms. The stories Babylonians told about their gods reveal a culture wrestling with the same fundamental questions that occupy theology and philosophy today. Where did the universe come from? Why does chaos exist? How should humans relate to the divine? What happens after death? The answers Babylon provided to these questions echo through scripture and religious tradition to this day. But understanding those answers requires us to enter the Babylonian worldview completely. We need to see reality as they saw it, where gods were real, powerful, and intimately involved in human affairs. That journey begins with the ancient Mesopotamian concept of divinity itself. Chapter 5. The code that changed justice forever. The stone stele containing Hammurabi's code now resides in the Louvre Museum in Paris. Scholars discovered it in 1901 at the ancient city of Susa, where it had been taken as war plunder centuries after Hammurabi's death. When archaeologists first translated the laws, they realized they were reading one of the most important documents in human history. This wasn't just ancient Babylonian law. This was a window into how civilization itself learned to organize justice. Let's examine specific laws to understand their impact. Law 196 states, "If a man put out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out." This is the famous lex talionis, the law of retaliation. Exodus 21:24 contains nearly identical wording. Leviticus 24:21, Leviticus 24:20 repeats it. Did Hebrew scribes copy from Hammurabi? Not directly, but both legal traditions emerged from the same ancient Near Eastern culture where proportional justice had become the accepted standard. Law 229 addresses construction. If a builder builds a house for someone and does not construct it properly, and the house which he built fall in and kill its owner, then that builder shall be put to death. Today we call this legal liability. Professionals must meet standards of competence. If their failure causes harm, they face consequences. This principle now underlies modern tort law, medical malpractice standards, and professional licensing requirements. Law 138 protected women. If a man wishes to separate from his wife who has borne him no children, he shall give her the amount of her purchase money and the dowry which she brought from her father's house, and let her go. This granted divorced women financial security. In a society where women couldn't easily earn independent income, this law prevented destitution. The Torah later included similar provisions for divorce settlements. Subscribe to discover more surprising connections between ancient law and modern life. Law 48 addressed debt forgiveness. If anyone owe a debt for a loan, and a storm prostrates the grain, or the harvest fail, or the grain does not grow for lack of water, in that year he need not give his creditor any grain. He washes his debt tablet in water and pays no rent for this year. This was ancient bankruptcy protection. It recognized that sometimes failure to repay debt results from circumstances beyond one's control. The biblical concept of Sabbath year debt forgiveness, described in Deuteronomy 15, echoes this principle. But some laws shock modern sensibilities. Law 129 states, "If a man's wife be surprised with another man, both shall be tied and thrown into the water, but the husband may pardon his wife and the king his slaves." This trial by ordeal seems barbaric today, yet it actually represented judicial procedure in an era without forensic evidence. The river was believed to be sacred. If the accused person drowned, the gods had judged them guilty. If they survived, the gods had proclaimed innocence. Law 195 declared, "If a son strike his father, his hands shall be hewn off." This extreme punishment reflected the absolute authority of fathers in Babylonian society. The fifth commandment in Exodus 20:12 commands honoring parents, and Exodus 21:15 prescribes death for striking a parent. Both traditions valued family hierarchy as essential to social stability. Law 153 reveals darker aspects of Babylonian society. If the wife of one man on account of another man has their mates murdered, both of them shall be impaled. This addressed conspiracy to murder. The punishment, impalement, was reserved for the most serious crimes. It was designed to be public and terrifying, deterring others from similar actions. Trade regulations appear throughout the code. Law 108 addresses fraud. If a tavern keeper does not accept corn according to gross weight and payment of drink, but takes money and the price of the drink is less than that of the corn, she shall be convicted and thrown into the water. Babylonian tavern keepers were typically women. This law protected consumers from price gouging and ensured fair commercial practices. Agricultural laws were crucial in an economy based on farming. Law 42 stated, "If anyone take over a field to till it and obtain no harvest therefrom, it must be proved that he did no work on the field, and he must deliver grain, just as his neighbor raised, to the owner of the field." This ensured that rented land was actually cultivated, preventing abuse of rental agreements. Professional standards were detailed. Law 215 regulated surgeons. If a physician make a large incision with an operating knife and cure it, or if he open a tumor with an operating knife and saves the eye, he shall receive 10 shekels in money. But Law 218 warned, if a physician make a large incision with the operating knife and kill him, or open a tumor with the operating knife and cut out the eye, his hands shall be cut off. Medical practice carried high stakes in ancient Babylon. Slavery was integrated into Babylonian society, and numerous laws regulated it. Law 15 prescribed death for helping slaves escape. If anyone take a male or female slave of the court, or a male or female slave of a freed man, outside the city gates, he shall be put to death. Yet Law 117 limited debt slavery. If anyone fail to meet a claim for debt and sell himself, his wife, his son, and daughter for money or give them away to forced labor, they shall work for 3 years in the house of the man who bought them, or the proprietor, and in the 4th year they should repay Shekaibi Setbat seat. What's revolutionary about Hammurabi's approach wasn't the specific laws themselves. Many were traditional, already enforced by custom. What changed was the act of writing them down, standardizing them across an entire empire, and publishing them publicly. Justice became predictable, transparent, and theoretically accessible to everyone. A farmer in a remote village could appeal to the king's written law against a corrupt local official. Clay tablets preserve actual court cases from Hammurabi's era. In one case, a man claims another man's ox gored his own ox to death. He demands compensation according to the law. Witnesses testify. Officials investigate. A judgment is rendered based on precedent and written law. This was revolutionary, systematic justice based on evidence and established legal principles rather than merely the whim of whoever held power. Yet we must be honest about the limitations. Most Babylonians were illiterate. They couldn't read the laws inscribed on stelae. They depended on scribes to explain legal rights. The wealthy could hire better scribes and had better access to justice. Corruption surely existed, but the principle had been established. There should be written, public, standardized law governing society. Like this video if you now understand why Hammurabi's code matters. This legal revolution spread throughout the ancient Near East. When we read biblical law in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, we're reading texts composed centuries after Hammurabi, but emerging from the same legal culture he helped create. The biblical laws are often more humane. They place greater limits on slavery. They include more protections for the poor. They emphasize covenant relationship with God rather than purely civil order. But the framework written law, proportional justice, public standards came from the tradition Hammurabi represented. The Code of Hammurabi proved that civilization required more than armies and walls. It required justice, or at least the aspiration toward justice. It required the belief that rules should apply consistently and that even kings were bound by law, since law came from the gods themselves. This idea that rulers operate under divine law rather than being laws unto themselves would eventually develop into modern concepts of constitutional government and human rights. But Babylon was about more than law. The city's religious life shaped its identity even more profoundly than its legal system. And understanding Babylonian religion requires us to explore a pantheon of gods whose stories, powers, and worship transformed into archetypes that still inhabit religious imagination today. When we turn to the divine realm as Babylonians understood it, we enter a world where gods fought wars, fell in love, died, and were reborn, and determined human fate through celestial movements. This religious worldview would both fascinate and horrify biblical writers, shaping how they understood their own faith. Chapter 6: Gods Who Walked Among Men. Babylonian religion was polytheistic. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of deities populated their divine realm, but like Greek or Roman mythology, a few major gods dominated. Understanding these gods helps us understand Babylon's entire civilization, because religion wasn't separate from daily life. It was daily life. Every action occurred within a divine framework. At the top of the original Mesopotamian pantheon stood Anu, the sky god. Anu represented ultimate divine authority. His name literally meant heaven, but Anu was distant, rarely intervening directly in earthly affairs. He reigned from his celestial palace while other gods handled daily cosmic operations. Anu was more of a constitutional monarch, ultimate source of authority but not actively governing. Enlil, the god of wind and storms, held real executive power in the traditional Mesopotamian pantheon. He ruled from the city of Nippur, which remained a religious center for thousands of years. Enlil embodied the dangerous power of nature. Storms could destroy crops or bring needed rain. Wind could fill ships' sails or capsize boats. Enlil was respected, feared, and offered constant sacrifices to maintain his favor. The Sumerian flood myth, written centuries before the biblical account in Genesis, features Enlil as the god who decides to destroy humanity with a flood. Sound familiar? The story preserved in the Epic of Gilgamesh tells how Enlil grew angry at noisy humans and sent a devastating flood. But the god Enki warned one righteous man named Utnapishtim to build a boat and save his family and animals. The parallels to Noah's flood are unmistakable. Enki, called Ea in Akkadian, was the god of fresh water, wisdom, and magic. While Enlil represented raw power, Enki represented intelligence and craftiness. Myths portray Enki as humanity's protector, the god who gave humans arts, crafts, and civilization itself. In one story, Enki organizes the cosmos, assigning each god their role and each part of creation its proper function. He was the divine engineer who made the universe run smoothly. These three gods, Anu, Enlil, and Enki, formed the traditional ruling triad of Mesopotamian religion. But when Babylon rose to power under Hammurabi, something significant happened. Marduk, Babylon's patron god, rose in status. Eventually, Marduk would be proclaimed supreme god, replacing Enlil in effective authority. Comment below, how do you think politics influenced ancient religion? The elevation of Marduk wasn't just religious, it was political theology. If Marduk was supreme, then Babylon, Marduk's city, deserved supremacy. This required mythological justification. Babylonian priests composed the Enuma Elish, often called the Babylonian creation epic. This text rewrote the creation story to place Marduk at the center. The Enuma Elish begins with primordial chaos. Apsu, representing fresh water, and Tiamat, representing salt water, existed as the first divine beings. Their waters mingled and produced the younger gods. But these younger gods were noisy and disruptive. Apsu planned to kill them to restore peace. Enki discovered the plot and killed Apsu first. Then Tiamat, enraged at her consort's death, created monsters and went to war against the younger gods. The gods panicked. Who could defeat Tiamat and her army of monsters? The gods offered supreme authority to whichever god would fight Tiamat. Marduk accepted the challenge. He demanded that if he won, all gods would acknowledge his kingship. They agreed. Marduk armed himself with winds and storms, confronted Tiamat in cosmic battle, and defeated her. He split her corpse in half, creating heaven from one half and earth from the other. Then Marduk organized the universe, assigned gods their roles, and created humanity from the blood of Tiamat's slain general. This myth accomplished several things. It explained creation. It justified Marduk's supremacy. It presented cosmic order as the result of violent conflict between chaos and civilization. And it defined humanity's purpose. Humans were created to serve the gods, performing labor and offering sacrifices so the gods could rest. Compare this to Genesis 1. In the biblical account, God creates through speech alone. Let there be light. There's no cosmic battle. There's no struggle against chaos. There's one God, effortlessly creating through divine command. Yet scholars note parallels. Genesis 1:2 describes the earth as formless and void, with darkness over the deep. The Hebrew word for the deep is tehom, linguistically related to Tiamat. Many scholars believe Genesis 1 was written partly as a counter-narrative to the Enuma Elish, demythologizing creation and proclaiming one god rather than many. But Marduk wasn't the only important Babylonian deity. Ishtar, called Inanna by the Sumerians, was the goddess of love, sexuality, fertility, and war. This combination seems strange to modern minds. How can one goddess embody both love and war? But in ancient thinking, both involved passion, intensity, and power over life and death. Ishtar was one of the most widely worshipped deities in the ancient Near East. Her cult spread from Mesopotamia to Egypt, Anatolia, and Canaan. The Bible mentions her under the name Ashtoreth or Astarte, condemning Israelite worship of her. Jeremiah 7:18 describes women baking cakes for the Queen of Heaven, almost certainly a reference to Ishtar. Despite biblical condemnation, archaeological evidence shows Ishtar worship continued among Israelites for centuries. The most famous Ishtar myth is her descent to the underworld. This story was so important that versions exist in both Sumerian and Akkadian. Ishtar decides to visit the underworld, ruled by her sister Ereshkigal. As she passes through the 7 gates of the underworld, she must remove one item of clothing and jewelry at each gate, arriving finally naked and powerless. Ereshkigal kills her and hangs her corpse on a hook. With Ishtar dead in the underworld, fertility ceases on Earth. Plants stop growing. Animals stop reproducing. The gods panic. Enki creates a sexless being who descends to the underworld and retrieves Ishtar through trickery, but no one can leave the underworld without providing a substitute. Ishtar returns to find her husband, Dumuzi, sitting on her throne rather than mourning. Enraged, she assigns him as her replacement. Dumuzi's sister eventually negotiates a compromise. Dumuzi will spend half the year in the underworld and she will spend the other half. This myth explained the seasons. When Dumuzi dwelled in the underworld, it was the dry season when little grew. When he returned, fertility returned to the earth. The story also explored themes of love, betrayal, death, and the cyclical nature of life. Ancient peoples didn't see death as absolute end. They saw it as part of a cycle, with the divine realm constantly renewing life. Share this with anyone fascinated by ancient mythology. Shamash was the sun god and god of justice. Each day, Shamash traveled across the sky, seeing all human actions. Nothing escaped his notice. This made him the perfect divine witness and judge. The image at the top of Hammurabi's law code shows Shamash handing the laws to Hammurabi, indicating that law came from divine justice itself. Sin was the moon god, worshipped especially in the cities of Ur and Haran. The moon's regular phases made it useful for tracking time. Calendars were based on lunar months. Sin's importance would continue for centuries. Even as Babylon rose and fell, sin remained significant. In the 6th century BC, the last king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, Nabonidus, elevated sin above Marduk, causing a religious crisis. Babylonians believed gods lived in temples. The temple wasn't just a place to worship, It was literally the god's house. Priests fed the god daily by placing food before the god's statue. They dressed the statue. They performed rituals to awaken the god in morning and put the god to sleep at night. Temples owned vast lands, employed hundreds of workers, and functioned as banks and administrative centers. Worship involved sacrifice, prayer, and festivals. The most important Babylonian festival was the Akitu, the New Year festival celebrating Marduk's victory over chaos. This festival lasted 12 days and included ritual processions, the humiliation and restoration of the king, and the ritual reading of the Enuma Elish. The king had to grasp Marduk's hand in the temple, symbolically receiving authority for another year. Divination was crucial to Babylonian religion, since gods controlled fate. Learning the god's will could prevent disaster. Priests examined animal livers, observed oil patterns in water, watched bird flight, and most importantly, studied the heavens. The movement of planets and stars revealed divine intentions. This is where astrology was born, and it leads us to one of Babylon's most significant contributions to human knowledge: systematic astronomy and mathematics. Chapter 7. The elevation of Marduk's rise to supreme deity required more than the composition of the Enuma Elish. It required centuries of religious development, political pressure, and theological creativity. Understanding how a local city god became the king of heaven reveals how ancient religion actually functioned. Gods weren't abstract theological concepts. They were tied to specific places, communities, and political interests. Originally, Marduk was probably an agricultural deity connected to thunderstorms and rain. His name may derive from Amar Uchu, meaning calf of the sun god. This suggests Marduk began as a minor deity associated with Shamash, but as Babylon grew in political importance, Marduk's status grew proportionally. By Hammurabi's time, Marduk was already being identified with older, more powerful gods through a process called syncretism. Syncretism happens when two gods are declared to be the same deity under different names. Babylonian theologians proclaimed that Marduk was really Enlil in his aspect as king of gods. Marduk was really Shamash in his aspect as judge. Marduk was really Nabu in his aspect as wisdom. This process, called the theology of multiple names, allowed Marduk to absorb the attributes and worship of other deities without causing religious revolution. The text, known as the Great Hymn to Marduk, lists 50 names for Marduk, each revealing one of his aspects or powers. This wasn't poetic flourish. Ancient names carried essence and power. By possessing 50 names, Marduk literally embodied 50 divine powers. The text proclaims Marduk as Anu decides the fate of the land. Marduk as Anil makes counsel good. Marduk as Ea knows all wisdom. This formula repeated through all 50 names, systematically absorbing the entire pantheon into Marduk. Some scholars suggest this was moving toward monotheism. If all gods are really aspects of one supreme god, you're approaching the idea of one god. But Babylonian religion never crossed that threshold. Other gods remained real and received worship. What emerged was more like henotheism, the worship of one supreme god while acknowledging others exist. The Bible's authors knew this theology and rejected it. Isaiah 46:1 mocks Babylonian gods. Bel bows down, Nebo stoops low. Their idols are borne by beasts of burden. Bel was another name for Marduk. Nebo, or Nabu, was Marduk's son. The prophet declares that during Babylon's fall, even the great gods will be humiliated, carried away as plunder by conquerors. But in Babylon's glory days, Marduk's supremacy seemed eternal. His temple in Babylon, the Esagila, was one of the ancient world's most magnificent structures. Ancient descriptions claim it gleamed with gold, silver, and precious stones. The statue of Marduk inside was crafted from over 20 tons of gold. Whether these descriptions are accurate or exaggerated, they reveal how Babylonians viewed their supreme god, magnificent beyond measure. Subscribe if you're fascinated by how ancient religions developed. Ziggurat, Etimenanke, adjacent to the Azagila, physically embodied the connection between heaven and earth. This massive stepped tower rose about 300 feet high, with a temple at the summit where Marduk could descend from heaven. The structure had 7 levels, each painted a different color representing celestial spheres: white, black, red, blue, orange, silver, and gold. Climbing this structure was like ascending through the layers of heaven itself. Genesis 11 tells the story of the Tower of Babel. After the flood, humanity settled in the land of Shinar, the biblical name for Mesopotamia. They decided to build a city and a tower reaching to heaven to make a name for themselves. God came down to see the tower and said, "Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." So God scattered them across the earth and confused their languages. Most scholars believe this story was inspired by Babylonian ziggurats, particularly Etmananki. The biblical narrative transforms Babylon's proudest religious achievement into a symbol of human arrogance. Where Babylonians saw a ladder connecting earth to heaven, biblical writers saw dangerous pride, an attempt to reach divine status through human effort. The confusion of languages explains linguistic diversity while delivering a moral lesson about pride, yet there's a deeper connection. The name Babel comes from the Hebrew word meaning confusion, but it's clearly a play on Babylon, which in Akkadian was Babalu, meaning gateway of God. The biblical authors took Babylon's own name, which proclaimed the city as a divine gateway, and reinterpreted it as a site of confusion and judgment. This is sophisticated theological polemic. Marduk's elevation wasn't just mythology, it shaped international politics. When foreign kings conquered Babylon, they had to acknowledge Marduk to legitimize their rule. When the Hittite king Mursili I sacked Babylon around 1595 BC, he carried off the statue of Marduk. This wasn't just looting, it was a theological statement. Without Marduk's statue, Babylon lost divine protection. Subsequent rulers expended enormous effort to recover and restore the statue, because the city's legitimacy depended on Marduk's presence. Centuries later, when the Assyrian king Sennacherib destroyed Babylon in 699 BC after a rebellion, he systematically desecrated the temples and allegedly threw Marduk's statue into the river. This was religious genocide, an attempt to destroy not just a city but its entire spiritual foundation. But Sennacherib's son, Esarhaddon, rebuilt Babylon and restored Marduk's cult, recognizing that ruling Mesopotamia required Marduk's endorsement. The most successful Babylonian king after Hammurabi, Nebuchadnezzar II, was obsessed with building projects honoring Marduk. Nebuchadnezzar rebuilt the Isagharal temple complex. He renovated the ziggurat. He constructed the Ishtar Gate, covered with blue glazed bricks and images of dragons and bulls, leading to the temple quarter. Every construction project proclaimed Marduk's glory and Nebuchadnezzar's devotion. Nebuchadnezzar's inscriptions repeatedly claim that Marduk chose him as king. One inscription reads, "Marduk, the great lord, looked with favor upon me. To the kingship over the land he called me. The heart of Marduk, my lord, I have made glad." This wasn't just propaganda. Nebuchadnezzar genuinely believed his authority derived from Marduk. When he conquered Jerusalem in 586 BC, he saw it as Marduk's victory over the God of Israel. But Marduk's supremacy also reflected something deeper in Babylonian culture, a drive to understand cosmic order. If Marduk organized the universe after defeating chaos, then understanding that order meant understanding Marduk's design. This led Babylonian priests to study the heavens systematically, recording celestial movements and seeking patterns. They believed the gods wrote messages in the stars. Reading those messages required mathematics and careful observation. This combination produced revolutionary advances in astronomy and mathematics that still structure our daily lives. And when we explore Babylonian mathematics, we discover why you have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle. We discover why our day divides into 12 hours of daylight and 12 of night. We find the origins of the week with 7 days named after 7 celestial bodies. All of this, every time measurement system we use, traces back to Babylonian mathematical astronomy. But that story deserves its own exploration. Chapter 8. Mathematics that built our world. You check your watch. It shows 3:47 p.m. You don't think about why an hour has 60 minutes or why a minute has 60 seconds. You just accept it as natural. But it's not natural at all. It's a Babylonian invention over 4